President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee for president. Today, Valley News team's Ethan Kramer sat down with local Democratic lawmakers to get their thoughts on the recent moves.
President Joe Biden addressed the nation for the first time since announcing he will not seek re-election. North Dakota Democratic NPL committeeman Jamie Selzler says Democrats were saddened by the news of him dropping out, but they remain optimistic.
For many people, a combination of appreciation. There was a lot of sadness. But there was also a lot of excitement.
Once the news had settled about President Biden, the North Dakota delegation that is headed to the Democratic National Convention next month came to a consensus to support the current vice president to be the nominee.
We had a meeting that evening as the North Dakota delegation going to the National Convention, and it was just unanimous support for Vice President Harris on that call.
While the DNC is just over 3 weeks away, and North Dakota House Representative Carla Hansen says it's exciting seeing Harris as the presumptive nominee and that there is a lot of momentum trending her way.
Really excited to see how a President Harris continues the work that President Biden has started. It's especially important for her to advance and continue to advance policies that help the working families of North Dakota, not just the rich and powerful.
Speaking with other Democrats, Hansen said people like her youth and that her character is not in question compared to the current Republican nominee.
Her youth and her energy, they are excited about the fact that she is a person who will focus on the rule of law as opposed to the Republican candidate who is actually a convicted felon.
The Democratic Party is more energized and excited than I've seen in many, many years. The last time I saw this level of excitement, honestly, was probably 2008 when Barack Obama was our nominee.
Harris has already been looking at potential running mates and has raised over $100 million for her campaign since Biden announced that he will not be running for re-election. Reporting in Fargo, Ethan Kramer, Valley News Live.